Prepare to have your mind blown, because everything you thought you knew about the world is probably wrong. I'm talking about those rock-solid facts that everyone just accepts as truth, the kind of stuff that gets passed down from generation to generation, like some sacred knowledge. But here's the thing that's going to mess with your head. Most of these so-called facts are actually complete garbage. You know that feeling when someone tells you something you've believed your entire life is actually false? That uncomfortable moment when your brain tries to reject the new information because it conflicts with everything you thought you knew? Well, buckle up, because we're about to experience that feeling about 10 times over. Today, we're diving deep into the most stubborn myths that refuse to die, no matter how much science proves them wrong. And trust me, this isn't just some random collection of trivia. These are misconceptions that literally shape how we see ourselves, our history, and our world. We're talking about beliefs so ingrained in our culture that they're still being taught in schools, repeated by parents, and accepted by millions of people who have no idea they're spreading completely inaccurate ideas. But before we destroy everything you thought you knew, let me give you a heads up about just how deep this rabbit hole goes. We're going to cover myths about your own body that will make you question basic biology, historical lies that have shaped entire cultures, and scientific misconceptions that somehow survived decades of research proving them wrong. And here's the kicker. By the end of this video, you're going to realize that the human brain has this incredible ability to cling to false information, even when presented with overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Now, you might be wondering how these myths get so embedded in our collective consciousness in the first place. It's actually fascinating and terrifying at the same time. These false beliefs typically arise from a perfect storm of old wives' tales, outdated science, cultural stereotypes, and sometimes just plain carelessness when it comes to fact-checking. Once they take root, they spread like wildfire through textbooks, movies, casual conversations, and social media until they become accepted wisdom. The scariest part? Even when scientists debunk these myths with rock-solid evidence, they just won't die. It's like trying to stop a zombie with logic. The myths keep shambling forward, infecting new generations of believers who pass them on without question. Let's start with something that's probably going to blow your mind right off the bat. You know how everyone says humans only use 10% of their brains? That supposed fact that makes you feel like you're sitting on this massive, untapped potential, just waiting to unlock your hidden superpowers? Yeah, that's completely untrue. This myth is so pervasive that Hollywood literally built an entire movie around it. Remember that Scarlett Johansson film where she gradually unlocks more of her brain and becomes basically a superhuman? The whole premise is based on this 10% misconception that has absolutely no basis in reality. Here's what actually happens when scientists study the brain using modern imaging technology. They can see neural activity lighting up across virtually the entire brain during different tasks. We're not sitting around with 90% of our brain matter just collecting dust like some unused storage space. Your brain is this incredibly active, interconnected network where different regions work together constantly. The 10% myth creates this misleading fantasy that we all have this massive reservoir of untapped brain power just waiting to be unleashed. People waste time and money on courses and programs promising to unlock their hidden potential, when the reality is that your brain is already working at full capacity, doing the incredibly complex job of keeping you alive and conscious. But wait, it gets worse. This myth has been around so long that it's practically become part of our cultural DNA. People quote it in conversations, use it to sell self-help products, and build entire philosophies around the idea that humans are vastly underutilizing their mental capabilities. Moving on to something that's probably going to mess with every parent watching this video. You know how sugar supposedly makes kids hyperactive? How parents freak out about birthday cake and Halloween candy because they're convinced their children are going to bounce off the walls? That's another myth that needs to fade away for good. Scientists have actually studied this extensively, and the results are wild. When researchers gave some kids sugar and others a placebo, then asked parents to observe their children's behavior, something incredible happened. Parents who thought their child had been given sugar reported seeing hyperactive behavior, even when their kid had actually received the placebo. Think about that for a second. Parents were literally seeing hyperactivity that wasn't there, purely because they expected to see it. Their brains were so convinced that sugar equals hyperactivity that they interpreted normal behavior as something more intense. Now, sugar does affect behavior in some ways, but not in the cartoon-like hyperactivity explosion that most people imagine. The real issue is more subtle and has to do with attention spans and energy crashes rather than kids literally climbing the walls. This myth demonstrates something really important about how our brains work. We have this incredible ability to see what we expect to see, even when it contradicts reality. The whole sugar hyperactivity thing reveals just how powerful expectation can be in shaping our perception of reality. But that's nothing compared to our next myth, which has literally rewritten history in the minds of millions of people. Picture Napoleon Bonaparte in your head right now. I guarantee you're imagining this short, angry little man with a massive complex about his height, right? Well, congratulations. You've been mentally programmed by centuries-old British propaganda. Napoleon wasn't short at all. In fact, he was actually above average height for Frenchmen of his era. Here's where it gets really wild. When Napoleon died, he was recorded as being 5 feet 2 inches tall. But here's the catch that nobody talks about. That measurement was in French feet, not English imperial measurements. When you convert French feet to modern measurements, Napoleon comes out to about 5 feet 6.5 inches. For context, that made him taller than the average Frenchman of his time. So how did we end up with this image of tiny Napoleon? The British absolutely hated this guy, and they weren't above using satire and exaggeration to diminish his reputation. They deliberately spread propaganda depicting him as a short, ridiculous-looking figure to make him seem less threatening and more laughable. The whole Napoleon complex idea that we throw around today, it's literally based on enemy wartime propaganda that we've been repeating for over 2 centuries. This is what's so insidious about historical myth. They don't just distort facts, they actually change how we understand entire periods of history and the people who shaped them. Napoleon's supposed shortness has become such accepted wisdom that it's referenced in psychology textbooks and casual conversation as if it's established fact. But wait, we're just getting started with historical nonsense that everyone believes. Let's talk about Vikings and those iconic horned helmets that show up in every movie, TV show, and Halloween costume. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Those dramatic curved horns that make Vikings look like some kind of medieval heavy metal band. Here's the problem. There's literally zero archaeological evidence that Vikings ever wore horned helmets into battle. None. Archaeologists have found plenty of Viking helmets, and they're all simple, practical, rounded designs, without any decorative horns whatsoever. Think about it logically for just a second. If you're going into battle with a sword and shield, the last thing you want is a couple of horns sticking out of your head that your enemies can grab onto or that will get caught on tree branches when you're trying to maneuver. It would be like wearing a giant target sign that says, "Please use these convenient handles to stop me easily." So where did this ridiculous image come from? We can actually trace it back to one specific guy, a costume designer named Karl Emil Doppler, who created dramatic horned helmets for a Wagner opera in the 1800s. That's right, our entire cultural image of Vikings comes from opera costumes designed for dramatic effect, not historical accuracy. This is the power of visual media to completely rewrite history in our collective imagination. Once those horned helmets showed up in popular entertainment, they became more real to people than actual archaeological evidence. We chose the cooler-looking fiction over boring historical fact. Now here's the thing that really messes with your head about all of this. We've just destroyed some of the most widely believed facts in human history, and your brain is probably still fighting against some of this information. That's not a bug in how we think. That's a feature. Our brains are literally designed to resist changing established beliefs, even when we're presented with overwhelming evidence that we're wrong. So the next time someone tells you a fact that sounds too good to be true or too perfectly convenient, maybe take a second to question it. Because if there's one thing we've learned today, it's that the most confident-sounding facts are often the biggest lies. And honestly, that's both terrifying and kind of exciting, because it means there's probably a whole lot more stuff we believe that's complete nonsense.